Ronald Clark O'Bryan was an infamous criminal whose crimes are embedded in American history. This man chillingly murdered his own son Timothy on Halloween in 1974. It attracted international media attention, with reporters from all over the world keen to interview this horrible man. But what motivated him to commit such an awful deed? It was a cold-hearted act, concealed behind the guise of a generally wholesome Halloween tradition known as trick-or-treating. In this Halloween story, we'll shed some light on that event, which took place 51 years ago, while unravelling a web of deceit and greed attached to Mr. O'Bryan, ultimately leading to his downfall. Well, I'm Royston, and I'd like to welcome you back to Bluebeards Crime Chamber. As many of you guys are aware, we're currently trying to get this channel remonetised again, and that means that we still need your help. The way you can help is to watch this video from the beginning to the very end, and afterwards, maybe you might even think about doing a bit of a binge watch on some of the other videos that we've got on the channel. Leaving a like also helps. All of this activity will help us in time to reach our mission, and that mission is to be remonetised as soon as we can. But getting back to this story, Ronald Clark O'Bryan, better known as the Candyman or the man who ruined Halloween, was convicted for killing his 8-year-old son Timothy with potassium cyanide laced pixie sticks on Halloween in 1974. Fathers are generally expected to protect their children, shielding them from the bogeyman. They're supposed to scare away any monsters hiding in the wardrobe, or perhaps even under the bed. What's not expected of them is to actually turn into one of those monsters. However, in this case, it transpired that on the 31st of October 1974, O'Bryan and his friend Jimmy Bates took their children out trick-or-treating in Pasadena, Texas. After paying a visit to a home where the occupants failed to answer the door, the children became impatient and ran off to the next house. Mr. Bates followed them, while O'Bryan stayed behind. He soon caught back up with them, unexpectedly producing 5 giant 18-inch tubes of pixie sticks. At the end of the evening, he gave Mr. Bates's children, Mark and Kim, a stick each. He also made sure that his 8-year-old son Timothy and his 5-year-old daughter Elizabeth also had a stick each. The 5th pixie stick was handed to a 10-year-old boy later that evening by O'Bryan, who recognised him from church. Just before going to bed that night, Timothy asked if he could eat some of the treats that they collected, allegedly choosing his pixie stick, although it's been implied that the choice he made was actually influenced by his dad, who wanted him to eat that particular piece of candy. But the young boy was struggling to get the powdered candy out of the straw. His father, Mr. O'Bryan, was more than happy to assist him with this task, as he loosened the powder for his eager son. However, after taking a mouthful of its contents, Timothy complained that it tasted bitter. Therefore, his father gave him a drink to wash the taste away. The poor boy then immediately began to complain that his stomach was hurting as he ran to the bathroom. Shockingly, in the bathroom, Timothy was vomiting and uncontrollably experiencing dreadful convulsions. O'Bryan later claimed that he held Timothy while he was vomiting, and eventually he went limp in his arms. Unfortunately, the 8-year-old died within an hour of eating the candy. Initially, the police didn't suspect O'Bryan of any wrongdoing, and the reason was because people just don't do that. They don't poison their own children. However, their attitude changed after an autopsy was carried out. Timothy's autopsy was chilling. It revealed that the pixie stick he ate was laced with a fatal dose of potassium cyanide. Upon learning that another 4 children received one of these very same sticks, the authorities set out to recover them before it was too late. In a miraculous way, none of those sticks had been consumed, but they had been opened, with the top 2 inches removed and then replaced with cyanide. Once the cyanide was inside, the culprit then resealed the tube with a staple. According to the pathologist who tested the pixie sticks, the candy ingested by Timothy contained enough cyanide to kill 2 adults. The other 4 candies contained a large enough dose to incredibly kill between 3 to 4 adults. O'Bryan initially told the police that he couldn't remember which house it was where the pixie sticks originated from. The police soon became suspicious though of his excuses, because O'Bryan and his friend Mr. Bates had only taken the children to 2 streets. And the reason why they only went to 2 streets was because of the fact it had been raining. Their suspicions increased after learning that no one in those 2 streets had actually handed out the giant 18-inch tubes of candy. They had O'Bryan take them on a tour of that location. He took them on 3 separate occasions before pointing out the house where the candy allegedly came from. O'Bryan made the point that he visited that home before catching back up with the rest of the group. He said the owner had all of the lights out, but nonetheless opened the door and handed him the 5 pixie sticks. However, he mentioned that only the man's arm could be seen, an arm that he described as being hairy. The home was owned by a man named Courtney Melvin. Melvin was an air traffic controller. On Halloween, he left home for work around 1:30 that afternoon. He then put in a 9-hour shift before returning home close to 11 o'clock that night. It was a very simple task for the police to rule him out as a suspect, especially when they received 25 sworn affidavits confirming that he was in fact at work. As their investigation continued, the police became aware of a $100,000 debt attached to Ronald O'Bryan. In the previous 10 years before the crime, O'Bryan had gone through something like almost 24 different jobs. It seems he had trouble holding on to them. At the time of his arrest, he was suspected of theft from the company that he worked for, the Texas State Optical. He worked there as an optician. At that point, he was extremely close to being fired. His car was about to be repossessed. He defaulted on several bank loans and had already lost his house. The police then discovered that their suspect had taken out life insurance policies on both of his children during the months preceding Timothy's death. In January 1974, he took out $10,000 life insurance policies on both Timothy and Elizabeth. 1 month before Halloween, he took out an additional $20,000 policy on each child. In the days preceding Timothy's death, O'Bryan had yet again taken out another $20,000 policy on each of his children. His wife maintained that she had no knowledge at all about these policies that he took out, which isn't surprising, considering Ronald specifically told the insurance agencies not to mention the policies to her. Another thing the police became aware of was this. Unbelievably, the morning after Timothy died, his father called the insurance company inquiring about collecting on the policies taken out on his son. The suspicions of the police were heightened when they found out that O'Bryan had attempted to buy cyanide from a chemical supply store just before Halloween. Unfortunately, the real whereabouts of the poison's origin was never identified. However, with all of this evidence they gathered, O'Bryan was indicted for 1 count of capital murder and a further 4 counts of attempted murder. He was then arrested on the 5th of November 1974, entering a not guilty plea to all 5 counts. Why did this man though? Why did he give poison candy to those other innocent children? Those additional 2 boys and the girl had nothing to do with him. The authorities reasoned it was part of his sinister plan. If those other youngsters, his friends' children, plus his own daughter, also died due to the candy, he was hopeful of cashing in on his heavily insured children, while using the other deaths as a deflection. That was meant essentially to cover up the crime, while camouflaging his motive. Fortunately, his plan didn't work. Therefore, his trial began in Houston on the 5th of May 1975. During the trial, a chemist who knew O'Bryan testified that in the summer of 1973, he was contacted by the defendant, and the defendant wanted to know about cyanide, specifically how much of it could be used to kill someone. Even people related to him testified that on the day of Timothy's funeral, on the day his son was being buried, he spoke about using the insurance money from Timothy's death to take a holiday and to buy some additional items that he had an interest in. It seemed that his cold and calculated heart was on full display prior to and after he murdered his son. As a consequence, on the 3rd of June 1975, the chilling evidence was compelling enough for the jury to take less than an hour to find him guilty of capital murder plus 4 counts of attempted murder. The jury then took just over another hour to sentence him to death, which the judge coincidentally was in agreement with. After his conviction, his wife filed for divorce. She later remarried, and her new husband was very happy to adopt her daughter Elizabeth. According to the Reverend Carol Pickett, a former chaplain who worked for the Texas State Department of Criminal Justice, this was a man who witnessed around 95 lethal injections over the course of his career. He said that O'Bryan was shunned and despised by his fellow death row inmates for killing a child and was absolutely friendless. Those comments suggest that even cold-hearted killers seem to have standards. The inmates were so appalled at O'Bryan's crime that they reportedly petitioned to have an organised demonstration on O'Bryan's execution date to express their hatred of him. However, this guy was adamant to fight his execution as he continually expressed his innocence. He actually believed that he was being made a scapegoat by panic-stricken parents throughout the United States who were affected by what happened to young Timothy. His first execution date was set for the 8th of August 1980, which was to take place in this building. However, his lawyer successfully petitioned for a stay of execution. A second date was scheduled for the 25th of May 1982. That date was also postponed. Judge Michael Max Spaden penciled in a third execution date for the 31st of October 1982, which would have been the anniversary of the crime, and actually offered to personally drive him to the death chamber. It would have been the first time that Texas executed an inmate by lethal injection. But the Supreme Court delayed the date yet again. This was to allow the killer to pursue another opportunity for a new trial. So a fourth date was agreed for the 31st of March 1984. His lawyers then tried for another stay of execution on the basis that lethal injection was a cruel and unusual punishment. On the 28th of March, a few days before the execution, a federal judge rejected their request. This case made international news. Reporters from all over the world were very keen to interview the killer. This man was a former deacon of his local Baptist church, and he sang in the choir. Yet many of those reporters just couldn't stop themselves from looking into his cold and steely eyes when seeing him sitting behind the screen. This was 10 years after murdering his son, and literally just a few days before he'd take his very last breath, and yet he still didn't admit his guilt. On the 31st of March 1984, O'Bryan was finally executed by lethal injection. During the execution, a crowd of 300 demonstrators gathered outside of the prison. They were cheering and yelling out the words "trick or treat." Others began to throw candy at any demonstrators who opposed the death penalty. This man, Ronald Clark O'Bryan, was known as the man who ruined Halloween. It took several years for people throughout the United States to slowly return to the celebrations and customs that Halloween offered. Many other Americans boycotted Halloween. Some were put off for life due to the fear that what happened to young Timothy might happen again. At the core of this man's intention was nothing less than greed. This greed was created by living beyond his means. He became so desperate he was willing to sacrifice his own son and possibly other children simply to collect a bag of money. I think it's very true to say that Ronald O'Bryan was a horrible, horrible man. Here at Bluebeards Crime Chamber, we do attempt to unravel the mystery of true crime. And we're interested in your views. I mean, what did you make of this particular case that we've just discussed? Did it in any way put you off Halloween? Did it in any way affect your thinking? Did it make you think that maybe even today in 2025, there may be people out there just like Ronald O'Bryan that potentially might come into contact with our children? Whatever your opinion is, please share it with us in the comments. Anyway, we're currently working on our mission, and that mission is to get this channel remonetized as soon as possible. At the moment, we're about 3,000 watch time hours short, so we really do need your help. You can help us by binge watching some of the other videos on this channel. You can leave some likes where you can, maybe even share the videos that you watch with your friends. And all of this activity will have a massive impact on helping us to get back to monetization as quickly as we possibly can. With that in mind, there's a video on the screen about a cold case that took 58 years to solve. If you've not seen this one yet, why not watch it now?